Hello. Welcome everyone to this CFS side event on SAFER. That's a lovely acronym for Standards and Accountability for Effective Relief, a path forward for crisis responsive food safety measures. For those online, can you give a thumbs up if you can hear me well? So my name is Ruth. I work for the Food Safety and Quality team at the World Food Programme. Thank you for joining us today. We're very pleased to have you all, online and in-person colleagues. So for the first few minutes of the session today, I'd like to invite you to engage with the sort of interactive scenario that we have. So please scan the QR code or join the Menti using the code above. It should be both in the chat, online, on the screen as well, and for those in the room, just engage with your phones. We're going to give you about 3 minutes to participate in this short quiz, and there's going to be an opportunity to discuss this later on during the session. And for those online, if you have any questions at any time, just please raise your hand. We have someone monitoring the online space today. Okay, just 1 more minute. Okay, thank you very much for engaging in that with us. There will be an opportunity to discuss this game later on in the session today, but we'd just like to get started. And just to introduce a little bit, SAFER is a joint WFP and FAO project and a multi-agency effort to promote risk-based, crisis-responsive food safety and quality standards to ensure safe and nutritious food reaches people quickly and effectively wherever and whenever needed. So to start the session today, I'm going to hand over to Peijie Yang, who's the Specification and Regulatory Affairs Officer for the World Food Programme.
Thank you so much, Ruth, and good morning, everyone. I'd like to give you a quick outline of our work at WFP and share our SAFER challenges. On the next slide, you will see that in 2024, narrator, would you mind move the slide for me? Thank you. Yeah, in 2024, WFP has assisted almost 124 million of people through the distribution of 2.6 million metric tons of foods, ranging from fresh produces to cereal pulses to processed food, including specialized nutritious food for infant and young children. We have also distributed 2.2 billion of cash and voucher to help families to purchase foods from the local market. I'd like to introduce you to a few of our beneficiaries. On the left side, it's Hadra from Ethiopia. She has just received Super Cereal Plus, a type of infant food for her child who is moderately malnourished. And you can see the drawing on her face. To make sure Hadra and her kid gets the right nutrients safely, our team, the Food Safety and Quality Assurance, implements a rigorous food safety and quality system in place. It all starts by setting the right specification aligned with international standards such as Codex Alimentarius and ISO 22000. From supplier audits to third-party laboratory testing to last-mile spot checks, our system allows us to learn, improve, and ensure we uphold our standards each step of our supply chain. Now, let's move on to Harriet on the right side, who is buying potatoes from the local market in Rwanda. And there, our food safety and quality approaches shift. We provide vouchers and cash for people to purchase locally. Therefore, we rely on the local food control systems and work with national stakeholders to manage risks and also strengthen local capacities. Now, WFP operates in some of the toughest environments, and our operational challenges is further exacerbated because we don't have consistent food safety and quality standards for humanitarian emergencies. Now, when I say standards, I mean regulatory rules and how they are being put into place. Now, let me show you a few examples of our SAFER challenges on the next slide. When we say SAFER challenges, we refer to all the regulatory hurdles that are in relation to food safety and quality. On the screen, you can see that the SAFER challenges can arise for various reasons, from the best before date labeling for bulk rice to infestation impacting packaging of our processed foods, to national requirement of food fortification. Now, let me zoom in on one case of the oil to provide you more details. In this particular case, our oil shipment got detained because the vitamin A content exceeded the national requirement. The national standards required a lower level of fortification, while our specification, aligned with international standards and utilized by multiple humanitarian agencies, required a higher level. Now, the food is safe. It's aligned with international standards. And it has been successfully utilized in the country for years for programs. However, due to a mismatch, a barrier is created. So we all know that consistent and harmonized food safety and quality standards and implementation can help us to move food more efficiently. It can help us to cut the cost, reduce the lead time, and ultimately expand the reach to people. However, how do we achieve that in a world of increasingly diverse regulatory requirements? Now, when a crisis strikes and we need to respond, and we need to respond fast, what is safe food when life depends on it? You may be thinking, what about WFP just source food locally to solve these importation issues? Now, SAFER challenges stand there as well. When locally sourced infant food do not meet our specifications, we cannot accept them. Not because we don't want to support the local suppliers and economies, but because we don't have a regulatory basis to accept foods that fall short of Codex Alimentarius, which is the internationally recognized food safety benchmarks. Even if the food contains a food contaminant slightly above the threshold set by Codex, it is considered unsafe. And unsafe food for children is not an option for us. So we clearly don't have all the answers. And we are not the only organization facing these challenges. We stand shoulder to shoulder with our partners, FAO, UNICEF, and MSF Online, and others, to share our challenges, to learn together, and ultimately to ensure we get safe and nutritious foods to people in need. I'm very glad today, either virtually or joining in person, we are here to reflect on these important questions and to take this conversation forward. Thank you so much. And Ruth, over to you.
Thank you. And now I'd like to invite Alison Fleet, who's the unit lead at Medicines and Nutrition Centre for UNICEF, who I believe is online, just to say a few words and give the UNICEF perspective. Over to you, Alison, if you can hear me.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Great. Thanks so much to PG for that really fantastic introduction. I think it really describes some of the challenges that UNICEF also faces when we deliver safe food for children, as well as other populations in humanitarian crises. And it really is a privilege for us to be here together with many other members for this panel to really unpack how we can move forward with introducing standards and accountability frameworks to better improve our response in humanitarian crises. So the UN plays a vital role in responding to crises. And we stay committed to responding to delivering aid and really having a integrated response where we can provide compliant foods. So I think particularly for when we look at partners, maybe government partners, SAFER, this initiative really offers an opportunity to harmonise our humanitarian efforts and work together in a closer way, and also to provide an opportunity to look at national systems to have for this opportunity to harmonise the standards. So we really want to take the opportunity to reduce that fragmentation of standards so that when we do have a crisis, we're ready. And this is part of the preparedness efforts. So we're not really looking to duplicate efforts from governments. What we want to do is leverage existing systems and enhance them. But of course, we need that harmonisation to begin with to become more effective. So I think if we really look at the initiative for SAFER, there are a couple of really key benefits, and one of them is that we have an opportunity to leverage resources that are currently existing, both from the UN side, but also the existing resources within governments. But in order to do that, we really need clarity around the roles and responsibilities, accountabilities, and eventually we really want governments to be leading in that area, both in preparedness and then also in the emergency response. But in order to do this, we need to build the trust in our regulatory systems, trust in the international codex basis for humanitarian aid. And then where needed, we need to support policy development, capacity building, so that together we really have this unified system and are harmonised. So I hope that this discussion will really lead us on the right roadmap, where we can eventually be in a situation where we don't have hold-ups at customs, we talk the same language in terms of the standards, and we have a very aligned system for preparing and responding to emergencies. So I'd love to hand over back to you, Ruth, where we can dig deeper into this topic. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alison. And I would like now to pass over to Marcus, Senior Food Safety Officer at FAO, just to speak a bit about how this work supports, well, the SAFER project supports FAO's work, and also the links to the Right to Food team from Juan Jose following. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much, and wonderful welcome to all of you here in the room and also online. It's fantastic that you joined us, and we appreciate your interest in this topic. So maybe start with the obvious question, why is FAO involved here? And because FAO doesn't do traditionally food aid, right? We don't have helicopters, we don't drop food out of helicopters, and I know that my WFP colleagues don't like that example particularly, but we've all seen it. And so why FAO? It's an interesting discussion of what food means. Right? So first of all, WFP has reached out to us for some scientific advice. It's one of FAO's core activities to provide food safety scientific advice to international standard setting organizations and all of our members, of course, if they require and as they require it. And in that regard, we do a whole bunch of, we work with experts who perform a whole series of risk assessments, microbiology, chemicals, residues of veterinary drugs in food, allergens, you name it. We're doing it with the help of experts. So I'm not taking credit for our staff there. We source global experts for the appropriate topic. So as it so happens, everybody who does food production and food distribution runs into trouble once in a while, and the World Food Programme has reached out to us for some specific help, and we work together, and it was beneficial for both organizations, so we keep working together. And thanks to Ireland, now we have also the opportunity to work more focused on this SAFER project. So thank you, Harry. The whole concept around food is complicated in a number of ways. For one, we all immediately know what we believe to understand when we say food, yet none of our definitions will overlap, depending on the cultures, the habits, whatever we eat, but somebody else really doesn't like to eat or finds disgusting. So food is incredibly complex and really, really hard to define. Essentially, it's whatever people eat. Food safety is simplified. There are two categories. The one is I eat it once and I don't want to get sick, obviously, right? And so that's acute effects, and the other ones are chronic effects. If I eat it for the rest of my life, will it make me sick? That's over a range of 70 years most of the time. Lovely, if one can simplify the world in those two ranges. That is not reality, however. There's a lot of food that is eaten on certain times, certain occasions, whatever else. So it's actually much more difficult there, and these difficulties normally do not matter in high-income countries because we can afford to just simplify our world and go with these two approaches because food expenses are not relevant to most people in high-income countries, although that's changing as there is a poorer strata developing in all areas. Now, where it really comes head-to-head is in food aid. Food aid means it's only delivered where there's acute hunger or the risk thereof, right, if it's preventative. So that's acute. That's absolutely acute. And yes, we still don't want people to get sick if they eat then the food aid ones. That is counterproductive to everything we understand from nutrition, that food should nourish us and not make us sick. So that's fine, that's trivial, that's okay. But do we need to have the same thinking that we apply for 70 years of consumption of the same food when tomorrow there is no food otherwise? Can we have a different way of thinking? And this is not to propose that, oh, well, we don't care about food safety anymore. No, we have to adapt to resource constraints. If there are resource constraints, we have to, A, provide food as an immediate measure, WFP's core mission, to provide food where there is hunger, and B, and that falls then more to FAO again, redevelop supply chains, governance systems that reestablishes a food system and a food control system that enables people to self-govern, to self-support, to run their own economies again, and nourish themselves again. There is a transition, because if anybody experienced ever hunger, that is an awful feeling which triggers huge urgencies, right? It's the third most basic human needs. After air, water, there's food. And so we need to respond to that, and there needs to be a way to come back from nothing, where people, rightfully so, in acute hunger situation, will eat anything, irrespective of food safety concerns. And that's a personal choice, and that's not something you can govern, but it is a choice people will make. To a system where there is sufficient governance control to keep people safe. So how do we have these transition where we take resource constraints into consideration, we take temporary crisis situations into consideration, and are not confronted, or let's say WFP is not confronted, with food safety standards that are essentially based on the assumption I eat it for the rest of my 70 years of lifetime. That is a difficult discussion. That's an interesting discussion. It's a very, very challenging discussion. And we at FAO have this discussion with a number of stakeholders in industry, government, and elsewhere for quite some time, which gained some traction, because we all face the situation that food safety cannot become more and more stringent. Let's not forget that food safety is the #1 criteria that separates any product from becoming a food. The first and most critical criteria is food safety. Everything else is quality, right? Your apple has blemishes, you argue that you don't want to pay that much, but it has to be matching food safety requirements. So chewing gums, it doesn't have to grow on trees all the time. Chewing gums are regulated as food. Whether you want them or not, doesn't matter, right? They're there, same as marshmallows, also don't grow on trees. But they have to be safe, right? And they have to be safe from the basis of a 70-year consumption and acute, naturally. So, when we have resource constraint, when food security meets food safety, can we afford to screen out that much material as we're currently doing and triggering food shortages, preventing people from having anything to eat? Even if it wouldn't cause problems for the next 6 months, it wouldn't cause problems for the next 5 years, maybe in 70 years, but why won't we focus on also the first 5 years to get them then, to help them then think about the next, 65 years. Sorry, can't do math that quickly. So I'll stop here. Really thank you for the attention. I think it's a wonderful opportunity to work with WFP, to work with UNICEF, MSF, and others. And we are very grateful for the support of Ireland, who saw its value in seed funding these type of activities and allowing us to have meetings like this, or 2 of us are going today actually to the US, presenting at the American Association for Advancement of Science. There will be events in the Food Safety Conference in Dubai next month. So there is huge visibility that we have been able to achieve because of that, because it's a discussion that as crisis will increase, the number of crises, Ukraine war, climate change, whatever, it's a discussion that will hit us much harder to home in the future, also in high-income countries. And as economic hardship befalls more and more people in high-income countries, it becomes more and more relevant. So I don't have all the solutions. Don't hope here that I will promise now, make a slide and say that, because if I had, I would charge ridiculous speaking fees and offer them that way, but I don't. But what I do know is that we have to create them together. The only way to get through that is to have a collective creation of the right messages, of the right thought processes, of the right information. That requires all of us to think that through, to talk it through, to point out weak points, and then to go from there. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcus. Yes, and a great point there between the links of food safety, food security. And speaking a bit more to that point, I'd like to hand over to Juan Jose, who's on the Right to Food team at FAO.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the invitation to this. And I guess, as Marcus said, I mean, what we are talking about here is a sensitive matter, but it's a conversation that we absolutely have to have, right? And I think that's the importance of this space. At the end of the day, and I will elaborate on that idea, we are talking about trade-offs, and this is something that Marcus and I have been discussing many times, right? But maybe before going into the discussion as such, just a few things in terms of facts, realities, right? One is that, of course, the number of conflicts worldwide is augmenting, driven by climate change, driven by political affairs, and driven also by the undermining of multilateralism. I mean, we know the world we are into, which is really becoming, more complicated and more dangerous for many people in many ways. Then the other element is that food as such is also becoming one of the elements of the conflict as a weapon of war in some of these conflicts. So that makes, this whole conversation even more predominant. There has always been conflicts, but the situation is now, even more worrisome. Then, and we are just describing facts here, providing food to the people and ensure that people will not die of starvation is not just an ethical principle, it's a legal obligation by every country that has signed the Human Declaration of Human Rights and who is party of the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, which trains the right to adequate food. And that's a key word here. We always talk about the right to food, but that's shorthand to actually describe an obligation, which is a progressive realization of the right to adequate food. And the word progressive is also important because, of course, the assumption is that ensuring that in a given context, in a given geography, everybody will have access to adequate food is not something that can happen from one day to the next. And here is also the trade-offs that we are discussing. So the definition of what is adequate in international legislation is very clear. That means nutritious, that means healthy, that means safe. So food safety is a core component of the right to food. It's not a luxury, it's not something that only people in certain countries have the privilege to afford. It's part of the core obligation of a human right, food safety. But it's not also, of course, it's not only, of course, related to the right to food, it's also related to the right to health. I don't need to elaborate on that. But just to mention that the right of health, of course, is also an international right protected in international law. I also want to use the word dignity, which is not just a very nice and beautiful word in every language, but it's also a word which is part of the definition of right to food. And that has a lot to do with the concept of food safety. People have the right to have food in dignity. So within this context, how we can kind of work with this trade-off that Marcus was really elaborating so eloquently. There, within the right to food, this obligation of the progressive realization of the right to food, and there is this immediate obligation to make sure that no one will die out of starvation. So every country, and there's no excuses for that, have to make sure that no one will die out of hunger. And that's exactly the way through. When you are in that very situation where people can die, you have just to ensure that that person will not die. And that means trade-offs. But of course, you have to be careful because we cannot put aside all the other elements of the definition of the right to food. Still, food has to be safe. So how we can play with that trade-off? I guess risk assessment is the core word there, the core concept there, and that's very much what the project is about and what this wonderful collaboration that Ireland is facilitating between WFP and FAO is basically about. Looking into the details, into these hard, contextual decisions where we have to see how we can make sure that food is still safe, but we can ensure that we do not overdo the food safety at the cost of not making possible that core obligation of making sure that everyone is free of hunger. Let me also mention, of course, the voluntary guidelines on the right to food and of course, the framework for action for food security in crisis and protracted crisis by the Committee on Food Security, which provides some guidance, generic guidance, but some guidance on this matter. I guess also two key elements here are accountability and transparency, because the interesting thing about the right to food and actually all human rights is that fulfilling those rights is not only about the result, making sure that people is not dying because they are hungry or they are not being able to get their food in dignity, but it's also the process, how it happens. And that accountability and transparency means precisely what our colleague from WFP was saying before. If there are situations where we have to adjust the standards or if there are difficult conversations with national governments in terms of, okay, your standards and international standards may differ, we really have to operate those things in transparency. Because at the end of the day, the people we are serving, I don't like the word beneficiaries, our clients, whatever word you want to use, they deserve the same rights as everyone else. So they need to know, they have the right to know what they are eating and in what conditions. So they also can take these decisions in terms of trade-offs. And that's particularly relevant in terms of cash programming, because basically the choice goes down to the person, right? You're not providing the food. He, she is the one that has to take that food. And we all know stories from the past where that has been happening, and I don't know, they needed to utilize food that required water, and water was polluted locally, etc. So there are hard decisions to be made. But I guess that accountability and transparency in the process is a very important element here. Marcus alluded to that, and I think it's important to keep that in mind. It's all about, it's not all, it's also about resources. And resources are shrinking. There is less resources to confront crisis at a time when crises are booming. And that again puts further pressure in that element of the trade-offs. How we can keep providing food in dignity despite all these limitations, right? So that is basically what I wanted to share. And thank you so much again, Marcus and everyone for this wonderful conversation.
Thank you very much. And that sort of wraps up the introduction part of the session today. And just to say that SAFER, we're about 18 months, 2 years into the project now. So it really is a journey. And we're really at the moment where we can attend events like this and speak about it and invite discussion and thoughtful perspectives. Now, as you can imagine from the introduction, it's not, there are no quick wins. However, we would like to take this opportunity to share a recent success story with regards to some of the SAFER challenges. And for that, I'm going to hand over to Nargis, who's the legal officer from the Right to Food team at FAO, just to share a recent case study in that regard. So over to you, Nargis. She is online.
Thank you. Thank you. I hope I'm audible. Please confirm.
Yes, you are. We can hear you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. And good morning from Ethiopia to everyone in the Ethiopia room and online. But just to start with small correction first, I represent the Development Law Service of FAO, not the Right to Food team, though we collaborate very closely with my colleagues, and I believe our cooperation is very fruitful. So anyway, as Aruf said, we're advancing. It's been just 18 months journey, and we don't have ready-made recipes to how to advance the SAFER agenda. So we tried to explore different ways, and we looked at national and regional developments across Africa, where I'm outposted to, and we identified a timely opportunity in Botswana's effort to develop its first ever food security and nutrition policy. So the actual policy development process began in 2023 and was well underway when the draft policy reached us at the FAO Development Law Service. At that point, we observed a lack of explicit legal provisions on food security and nutrition, and importantly, on the right to adequate food. So to address this, during consultation with the stakeholders, they agreed to conduct a detailed legal review of Botswana's national policy, legal institutional frameworks related to food security and nutrition, with support from a national legal expert. So during the review, we identified gaps and produced legal recommendations emphasizing a human rights-based approach to the policy design. One of the key recommendations was to integrate a dedicated provision on food safety standards in emergencies within the existing emergency section of the draft policy. So the specifically, the provision calls for the development of crisis-responsive food safety measures, such as policy, regulations, and standards, to facilitate predictable and streamlined humanitarian food aid import procedures during emergencies. We understand that any recommendation will only be meaningful if supported by stakeholders who understand how food safety and quality in emergencies differ from food safety standards in ordinary commercial operations. So recognizing the need for this understanding, engagement, and buy-in of the stakeholders, we decided to integrate a national training on the right to adequate food, so planned under the Germany-funded global project on legislating for the right to food, with the policy validation workshop last June. And this combined approach proved efficient and impactful, as our capacity building efforts equip national stakeholders how to embed, with understanding how to embed human rights principles and into the policy with focus on vulnerable groups, on inclusivity. I was present in the room and I was happy to see that recommendations, including this specific recommendation, received support from participants in group discussions and their presentations. So the provision was consequently retained in the final policy document, which shows its relevance and importance, but it's an early step towards strengthening food safety in emergency responses. I consider this progress as promising, but for this foundation to yield tangible results, continued support and resources will be needed. And they will be needed to assist Botswana in translating policy changes into concrete regulatory reforms. And it can be done through capacity building for food safety regulators and other legal practitioners and technical assistance in drafting a crisis responsive food safety policies, standards, regulations. So Botswana's efforts is a lesson for us in terms of efficient approach for advancing SAFER agenda through national level policy changes. It's also, I believe, a valuable model for other countries in the region and beyond, aiming to embed food safety measures in emergency food safety assistance frameworks. So it also underscores the necessity of proactive and rights-based policy design to support the development of crisis responsive regulation standards and improve predictability and efficiency of humanitarian food assistance. This, we didn't end just with Botswana. This case has been shared not only with you, but with Southern African Development Community parliamentarians to show them how they can advocate for legal changes. And notably, it was done during the training on the right to adequate food that we delivered for them as well. So notably, SADC parliamentarians raised the question on the right to adequate food emergencies ahead of the dedicated session, which shows the urgency of the matter. We also shared this case with SADC, and you know the SADC is a regional economic commission plays an important role in harmonizing policy and standards. And currently, SADC is developing a new regional food security and nutrition strategy, which offers for us an opportunity to scale Botswana's approach regionally. And it can help to lay the foundation for harmonizing food safety standards for cross-border humanitarian food aid operations. And actually, the Botswana stakeholders or representatives of the leading government institutions who were behind the development of the policy and they supported inclusion of that provision, they were sharing personally this example with SADC, so which I find is really a good way of convincing the stakeholders, getting them on board. So this case, to me, exemplifies how SAFER can leverage a national and regional processes to drive impactful changes that can be done through capacity building, communication is important, and cooperation with diverse stakeholders, as you can see. So to make sure that there's policy and regulatory changes for efficient humanitarian food aid. So with this, I conclude. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nargis, and congratulations on that work. So, we started the session today with a game, and whilst we're not going to go into the individual, or debrief the answers rather, since we did state there's no right or wrong, the purpose is really to introduce the topic and some of the operational challenges faced by the organisations here, so WFP, MSF, UNICEF, and the wider humanitarian community when delivering humanitarian food assistance. And maybe we can use the results or even the game to take this opportunity to invite your thoughts, perspectives, reactions, and questions either to the game itself or what was presented earlier on in the session today, to the work that Nargis has conducted, or to some of the comments by the previous speakers. Please do feel free to address your questions to specific speakers or just to the general panel. Those online, please feel free to unmute yourself, raise your hand. Those in the room, just the old-fashioned raise your hand and unmute your microphones. So the floor is open for comments, perspectives, reflections, questions, and yeah, we invite you all to engage with us.
So while everybody is still thinking heavily, of course, about the questions they have, I thought I'll just start with some comments. And I'm always impressed if we do these types of surveys, because it highlights all the requirements, right? So we gave you 3 minutes. It's typically not enough to really think it through, because there's too many options and they're all slightly overlapping, and this is by design. Because when we think about food, it's just really complicated, right? And if we are sitting here in the comfort of, let's say, more or less high income settings, the first thing that comes out is food safety, right? Food safety is top. Fine, nobody wants to die, get that. Pretty straightforward. But if then some more pressure scenarios are created, what do you do if? Then food security ranks on top every single time. And yes, it has to be safe. And that's in part, I think it reflects what I was trying to elucidate earlier. It's, okay, nobody wants to get sick while eating the food or immediately after eating the food. This is this acute effect, right? That's okay, that's trivial. But after that, it becomes a little bit more difficult, the discussions. Maybe just to trigger your thinking, pardon me if I talk too long, peanuts, ready-to-eat peanuts. And in ready-to-eat peanuts, there's always a mycotoxin. It's called aflatoxin, one of the most toxic substances that Mother Nature creates for us. It's a genotoxic carcinogen, causes cancer. There's no acknowledged safe level right now. Where do you set the threshold, the maximum level that's acceptable for your population? And you can postulate that, and 20 parts per billion, 4 parts per billion. You can map that against, does it make 1 maybe or 2 extra liver cancers per 100,000 people or not? And these numbers are all extremely fuzzy, right? The uncertainties around those numbers are out of proportion. Now you look around the world and you see that Europe has the lowest standard for these, so the tightest food safety regulation. There is no peanut production in Europe, and it's not a staple food. The Americans have a higher standard, about a factor 10 almost, or 5 at least. There's a lot of peanut production in the US, and if it rains at the wrong time, these aflatoxins are a little higher. They don't kill immediately. They don't kill even in 70 years. It's questionable whether they make any difference, the difference between these safety standards. But what it does do is it has an impact on trade. Europeans exclude enormous amounts of material by siphoning off the cleanest stuff they can find because they can afford it. It's not a staple food. And for the few peanuts that you need while watching TV, it's not price sensitive, right? So that's the other reality. That's the political reality of food safety. So we have to be aware of that. It's not always a life or death situation. And most importantly, we have to find a way to talk about that. There is the notion that there is only safe or not safe is oversimplified and comes with huge repercussions when it gets to food security. Thank you.
I mean, thank you, Marcus, for raising another elephant in the room that we really have to be very honest and transparent about, especially as ETHIA. We have Codex Alimentarius and we have global standards. But, it's for some reason that these kind of barriers are called they are called trade barriers, because sometimes that's what they are, especially in regions of the global north. So we have to be very cognizant of that. Food safety is deliberately used as a barrier to trade, right? But there is also some lessons that we can get from some countries in the global north in terms of risk assessment, because that's the irony. There is this overprotection of external market, but then there are trade-offs about the local market. You can buy non-pasteurized cheese in France because, we consider that there is information about that, consumers can make that choice. You can sell products directly coming from the farm, provided you are not selling them to, beyond a very local market, and food safety standards are very much low in that case because there is no SPS or any kind of inspections at that point, right? So standards have to be determined on basis of risks. That's the very logic of food safety. And that is the logic that we should be also applying in emergency context, even for further reason, because we really have to make sure that people are surviving. But we know it's a difficult conversation, because if that is taken wrongly, or we do not explain it this way with all its complexity, as Marcus said, anything food-related is complex, what it might look like is as if we are saying that some people in certain contexts have less rights, and that's not what we are saying whatsoever.
Thank you so much. At the beginning of our session, I introduced you to Hadra, the people we serve one of the people we serve in Ethiopia, and she had her kid with her. One of the questions we internally ask ourselves is, if we do have a food, but it's slightly above, slightly short over the standard, what would she choose for her child? Right? That's why we designed the game. We want to check in with every one of you. What would you choose as an individual at a time of emergency in this fictional world? What would you choose for you, your family, and your child? And I'm actually really glad to see that it comes up top, the amount of food, which stands for me, food security. And I would be very interested to hear every one of you. How was your experience working on the game? Did you struggle? Or was it straightforward? Did you go for the amount of food first to prioritize that for you and your family? Or did you struggle to say, I would really want to see something else for that? I'm wondering if anyone would like to share that.
I think we have a hand up online. Question online. Okay. So we do have a question online. So anyone? Okay. Okay, so we have some questions. Can you scroll up? Who is it online? Gabor, can you please pop your question in the chat, and then I'll read it out and we can discuss it. In the meantime, any comments, follow-up comments in the room? Mohammed, please.
Thank you, Ruth. My experience while doing the game, I think it matters a lot of how you are exposed. For me, who has done several emergencies, it was like my first choice is the security. The food safety is there. I'm a food safety officer, but the security is key. Because if you had attended several emergencies, you have seen what is on the ground. It's no longer fiction or what we see in the TV. Most of us have not even seen a malnutrition kid. That the food security is key. So for me, when I was doing it, I never even thought of the cost. I was thinking of saving the life, then thinking of the food safety parameters later on and the lead times. This is how I was doing it. Even the cultural things, I said, I'm sure, since we work, most of us are working in emergency, we can sensitize them on this. So for me, it was like the first three were the main thing. And this is, I think the concept of food security and food safety needs to be balanced properly here. Sometimes as the trade barriers, they are the ones contributing to food insecurity indirectly. because of what we are seeing. So it's like, which one comes first? All are contributing to each other. Thank you, Ruth.
Yes, go ahead, Mary.
Yeah, thank you. I think for me, when I was doing this, what came to my mind, being in the field, I've seen cases where we have food that has been even confirmed to be unsafe. But even destroying that food has to be guarded because there are people in need of that food. Because they are saying, how can you even destroy food when we have nothing to eat? Even when they are aware or they have been informed that this food is not safe. So which means that being able to access adequate food or even just something to eat is something that at times comes on the top of the list, as opposed to even thinking about safety. But then it's about the trade-offs. One of the things that we actually struggle with is where we have these stringent measures, as we were talking about the barriers to trade, where food is more scrutinized when it's coming into the country, as opposed to even the food that is in the market, that is being monitored in most of the countries. And even some of the governments who are imposing these have no capacity even to verify the quality of the food in those local markets. So that is something we are really struggling with. So, and I think I was actually thinking about how much we should be able to engage with the governments to understand the controls that we put in place to ensure that food is safe before it even gets into the countries. For them to just understand the investments around ensuring that food is safe, especially for humanitarian, because there's a lot of investment we do make in ensuring the food that comes in, as what Pedro presented as WFP, for example. Because, and also working in partnership with the governments to build those capacities to understand that there has to be risk assessments, as opposed to just saying that this food is unsafe, and probably just slightly above, as opposed to saying we can't even have this food distributed. There's also a lot of cost impacted when it comes to like destroying the food or returning the food when this food is needed and people are dying of starvation. So it's a lot of trade-offs. At times we even say, oh, it doesn't meet a certain nutritional value, just that, and it's rejected, while the food is even safe. So it's a lot of trade-offs, and I think a lot of engagement that needs to go around this to ensure that the top on that list on being able to access adequate food when it's needed comes at times now as number one, as opposed even to that safety, because as even Mark has talked about, some of those impacts of unsafe food, unsafe quote unquote, because again, it's another topic about whether what safety means, is whether is it gonna cause harm immediately, or is it something that will cause harm in years, as for example, the mycotoxin, we have the chronic effects. But again, if we are addressing hunger now, then we have to think about maybe safety in other lines, not as safety in terms of like it's gonna, cause death now. I don't think in most cases that's the case, but again, we are caught between to feed or not to feed, and should people die just because you're saying the food is not safe? But again, it's a topic that is really, and I think that's why we are here to look at then how do we address that, how do we engage the partners, how do we engage the stakeholders across the board, just to understand what it means when we can't feed people. Over.
Thank you, Mary. Do you want to react? Yeah.
Very, very short. I mean, of course, I guess we all agree on that trade-offs and the conversation that we're having and decisions, hard decisions that you have to take on the spot, right? But of course, I mean, I guess we can also agree that the whole point is to make sure that ideally, or in practical terms, those decisions should not be made. We should do whatever we can to make sure that we are not in that hard place that you are describing so well, where we have to choose between, security and safety, or even culturally appropriate, because sometimes that's possible. It has to do with how you design the programs, how you procure, et cetera, et cetera. So the world we are seeking for is one where, of course, humanitarian aid is providing all those elements, food which is culturally appropriate, which is safe, which is secure. We know in real life, sometimes you have to make choices, but I guess it's important for us not to miss that we should be in a place that we should not have to make those choices, because honestly, sometimes it's our responsibility as organizations doing humanitarian work that at the end of the day, we have to make our people in the field make those choices. So whatever we can do in advance to avoid that kind of trade-offs, the better, right? I think we have also not to lose that perspective.
Thank you. Quickly to respond that, we completely agree. That's why we are here to have this conversation. That's why when there are a few issues rising up on a trend, we've grouped us together among multiple agencies to talk about it, because we need to find solutions to prevent that from happening. Thank you.
Thank you. And we do have I have the reaction online from Gabor. Apparently, participants can't. Only the speakers who are already assigned speakers online can unmute. So we're trying to project the questions. But one reaction was we need to differentiate between standards, also differentiating SPS and TBT requirements. Addressing uncertainty is important, and protocols for governments should be developed accordingly. That was one response online. And then we also have a question specifically for Marcus. How do we encourage academia to generate more studies and data to challenge the food safety limits, like the aflatoxin you just mentioned? Also, how do we create a safe environment for food safety data sharing by authorities and private sector?
Wonderful comments and wonderful question. And of course, I have no good answers because I think it's an uncomfortable topic, right? So a food, maybe to start with that, a food is not like any other consumer product. We can have easy studies on Apple Watches and cell phones and whether, whatever, the electromagnetic radiation will cause brain cancer and whatever else has happened in the past. And there are studies, and so now we all have cell phones and are not afraid of cancer anymore from our cell phones, at least. So good. But food is different. There is no consumer product that is as emotional, as cultural, as socially connected to each and every single person than there is food, right? We go on dinner dates. We don't go Apple Watch buying dates or something. I mean, it's integrated in our lives, and it's the one thing after air and water that every human being needs, right? There's no exception. I have a different preference. It doesn't work that way. So that makes it harder to talk about things and makes it scarier, which is then often something where people shy away. Data alone will not change hearts and minds. Like the little anecdote I did with the aflatoxins ready to eat peanuts, there are others. Data have never changed minds. Science doesn't change minds. We need it. It's a shared reality that we have and that we need to rely on. We need to have a shared reality somehow. For the moment, we've chosen science to be that. Otherwise, we cannot even communicate, and that's okay. But the values that are behind are much more important. How do we, as collectively and individually, make decisions on how safe do we want it to be? Right? Because yes, there's always a choice. There's always a trade-off. There's nothing in our lives that doesn't require making choices. And we're used to externalizing, as the economists call it, many of the uncomfortable side effects. Now, the trash, where does it go? I don't know. It's exported sometimes. The air pollution, the wind blows it away, right? So tough luck for our neighboring countries, but at least there's always a wind. So we externalize a whole lot of things that are a result of our choices, and we are learning now that the world is actually not as big as we imagined it to be, and that we cannot continue to externalize things, that they come back, right? Then PFAS, the forever chemicals, and we've learned that lesson a few times, that there are chemicals that persist for a very long time, and they may have a negative effect on many people, and then we need to clean it up, if we can. That is true with food too. So it's not a question of, can we have it safe? No, it's the question of how much do we want to err on which side? And yes, public health is important, but food security is part of public health. So we have to just pick and choose and consider it a little bit more in a systems thinking way. Because if we have completely unsustainable ways of producing food, sufficient food, safe food, but then everything else poisons us because the environment suddenly is not so nice anymore, it's also not helping public health, right? So we have to look at this in a more integrated way rather than this super segregated, oh, I can just deal with that isolated because there's no effect on anything else. That's not the world anymore. There is an effect on something else. If we tweak it here, something shows up there. Do we want that? Yes or no? Right? That's fundamentally the problems we are facing. Uncomfortable as it is, because we got away for so long with externalization, and now we don't.
Thank you, Marcus. We have 2 questions online. What specific interventions are successful in empowering vulnerable groups, particularly women and girls, to build resilience and adapt to climate variability in their roles related to water, energy and food security? Thank you. And perhaps this also includes, sort of touches on the next question, which is how can we ensure that voices of the most marginalised are heard and included in emergency responses around food safety? Indeed, that's one of the questions that we'd like to also get your thoughts on. So please feel free, anyone else, to chime in on this, is how do we sufficiently include the voices of those who are affected by the challenges we're facing? So who would like to, thoughts on that, Mohammed? Yeah.
I can share my thoughts on the marginalized. One of the things we do, I think in the humanitarian world, we engage a lot of community. During distributions of food, we have a lot of community leaders. These communities speak the local language. They are educating, and this is the group which is a bit educated compared to the others, and it is inclusive. Both genders are there. So we get these people who can talk freely to the people, telling them that before people was like, I have no choice, this is the food. The food is tasting bad, I'll take it. But they could not air back their feedback. But now with the community-based, the marginalized people down at the ground talk to this, like a group of people who escalated back to the cooperating partners, the NGOs, and the other people doing the distribution. So the feedback is coming back. We're getting a better feedback compared to before. Before it was like we give them the food, we have no choice, and they have no choice. But now we're getting that the local language is being communicated. But this is very important, getting the feedback from the community-based. Because before, the NGOs who are just doing the distribution, the food monitor will be somebody speaking maybe one of these big, the languages we speak, English, French, or whatever it is, and the people who are receiving don't even speak the other language, speaking the local language. So now we're getting some feedback, and a lot of data is there to analyze this feedback. Yeah.
I completely agree. And by the way, the topic of languages is such a barrier in so many contexts that we tend to ignore, even when we use national languages, which are not really spoken by everyone in that country, right? And there are plenty of examples all over the world. And of course, I completely agree that things are getting better, also by SUM, but by NGOs in terms of engaging participants in humanitarian context. But I mean, the only thing I would like to qualify is that, of course, engaging leaders is important, but we also know from experience that leaders can be very biased, of course. I mean, it's an issue of power. So we also have to be very deliberate in the way we engage with groups which are traditionally marginalized, of course, including women, including the youth, including minorities and so on. But of course, I totally agree with you.
The engagement of government is very key. One of the barriers we're facing in SAFER, Peggy, I think you see this, is the documentation, unrealistic documentation. Food is moving from Senegal to Benin. Somebody, the receiving country is asking for a radiation certificate. Where do we get the radiation pollution in somewhere like Senegal to Benin? So this is something we need to look at, the importation documents. There are some of the documents which are unrealistic, asking for a radiation certificate. Oh, we are moving salt and the government is asking for a veterinary certificate. This is not meat. So this is the thing we need to educate, engage the government on this documentation. Because they're asking documents which are like, it's just to tick the box. Ruth, over to you.
Thank you, Mohammed. I'd like to give the opportunity as well to our Chief of the Food Safety and Quality Assurance Unit at WFP, who is online, just to see if she wants to add any comments, any thoughts to those questions. Virginia? You should be able to, you should have speaker rights. You are on mute though. Hi.
Hello. Oh, okay. It worked now. I hope you can all see and hear me.
Oh, hang on one moment. We have an issue with the sound.
Okay.
Is it our side or her side? Okay, I think there's an issue with the sound your side.
Can you hear me now?
It's very fuzzy.
Okay. Apologies for that. I'm disconnecting my headphones.
Yeah, we can't hear you. Maybe just try with the settings?
Okay. Well, I just wanted to acknowledge, I hope you
Sorry,
all
it's
of
not
the,
working.
it's not? Okay.
No. Sorry. We tried, okay. Yeah.
We have a very efficient partnership officer on the project. You can tell that. Let me maybe step in and answer some of the questions. How do we work in emergency? WFP have agreements with governments, high-level agreements for our interventions. In an emergency setting, we will have a coordinator with all the authorities to make quick decisions and trade-offs. And they are advised by senior food safety and quality officials. Generally, in terms of food safety and quality, we don't accept foods fall short of Codex standards. And when really serious trade-offs needs to be made, we would consult experts, we would reach out to Marcus, having scientific opinions, making sure we are backed up in these cases. Now, each country have different contexts. In certain countries, we would definitely transparently share our thinkings with the government, seeking their thoughts, agreements, alignment before moving forward. So that's how we operate. And as my colleague Mohammed mentioned, we do have feedback mechanism where we dialogue with the people we serve, the communities, getting their feedback. But what we see is in a standard setting environment or in a policy setting environment, these voices are missing. That's why growingly we are trying to now sit around the national standard setting committee meeting and calling for more voices to come in. Because we think the voice of all the stakeholders along the value chain is important, from the smallholder farmers to the medium enterprises and the large international corporations. They need to all sit around the table to provide insight and data as to what is really possible as standards, right? And then on top of that, it would be great to have people's voices there as well, to tell what are their priorities. This is something that we observed is potentially missing, especially at our international standard setting environment. And this is a question really for all. I really like the question, how do we bring their voices in? This is a question for all of us to think this through. How can we all do our part, bring more ideas, and then make that happen?
Thank you very much. We do have some more comments in the chat, but I am also conscious of the time and that we are moving towards the end of the session today. I would encourage you to keep the conversation going, and we'll pop an email in the chat which you can send these questions to, and we can engage further there with you, because as you've hopefully gathered from this session today, it is a collaborative effort. And we really do need your thoughts, perspectives, and reflections from all different backgrounds and experiences to contribute to this discussion so we can move forward and address some of these challenges. So unfortunately, I can't address we can't go into some of the other questions on the chat, but we will, maybe Marcus can speak to them in his as he closes this and then passes over to Harry here as well. Yeah, thank you very much for joining from our side, and I'll pass over to Marcus and then over to Harry O'Crawley, our representative from Ireland, who's joining us today.
Thanks, Ruth, and thanks everybody for the engagement. I think it's great because that's what we need, right? First of all, as part of that SAFER project, we need all the questions that can possibly come towards that new approach of thinking about things. Because if we know the questions, then we can prepare for the answers, or maybe preempt some of the questions by directly addressing them in the communication materials, that there's no need to ask those questions anymore. It's a sensitive topic. It touches us immediately in weird places. Each and every person we're having this conversation with, because it is that social, emotional, cultural connection of food that makes this so super hard. And yes, it immediately triggers questions like, where are beneficiaries in the international standard setting organizations? They are not, right? Where are marginalized populations? They're also not. Part of the UN system and part of Codex Alimentarius is, of course, fed by the ability to coordinate on a national level, to coordinate on an interest level, industry associations or something. And where food aid needs to be delivered, almost by definition, coordination broke down because systems broke down. The agri-food system broke down, there's not enough food, there might not be enough governance, there might not have enough government. So the level of coordination is just not there. And it's probably unreasonable to ask for internally displaced or refugees to say, hey, go coordinate yourself, collect some money, come to Rome, right? There's an important meeting. Not happening. Doesn't make sense. Hard to crack that nut. Hard to find even the energy if you're scrounging around for food, shelter, water, to, should I even bother about this discussion? Sorry, I'm busy with other things. So that's a whole different problem that we need to tackle somewhat, because it is a problem in international standard setting in any area, because it's driven by those who have the money to do the science, who have the money to generate the data, who have the money to send the people, and who have the money and abilities to internally coordinate. So that requires collective solutions as well, because we cannot, not FAO, not WFP, not anybody can single-handedly solve that. But collectively, we may be able to generate at least some channels to ensure that some of the information flows back and is reflected wherever these discussions take place. And that's what we intended as the start of the whole process. But when we started thinking about it, we had some internal meetings, today's meeting and future meetings, because I don't know the answers, nobody knows the answers, because whatever we did in the past has brought us to where we are right now. And if we don't like where we are right now, which has clearly some disadvantages, we need to do something new, something novel, something innovative, something that we don't do right now. That requires creativity, thinking, courage. Thank you to Ireland for funding that, because also there, it's not easy to find others that are willing to donate or to fund such an activity, because it's more nebulous, right? We couldn't promise Ireland, hey, we're gonna revolutionize the world and the output is this and this and this. No, it was a concept, it was a construct. And so yeah, we are happy that we are on our path, and I'll just stop here for now and leave Harry a chance. Thank you.
Thanks, Marcus. And over to you, Harry. So we have Harry O'Qualley from the Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine, representing Ireland. Thank you, Harry.
And thank you, Ruth, and thank you, colleagues. It's a real pleasure to be here. And I had a great, well-constructed response prepared, and you blew it up with the rich conversation we had here this morning. So I'll ignore this and I'll freestyle if you prefer. I suppose I might put it in a context from Ireland. 180 years ago, we had a famine in Ireland. A third of our people died, a third of our people left, a third of our people remained. Our population is still below now that it was 180 years ago. It had a massive impact on Ireland. And I think it goes to our psyche collectively as a national psyche of the impact of food insecurity, famine, and the impact on its people. But one of the things that it resonates is this whole issue about when you have food safety, and like to what degree are you going to go if you're hungry. People ate grass in the famine. There was nothing else. We grow the fast. The crops failed, so the potato crop failed. It was a monoculture, so the people ate grass. Clearly no nutritional value, but they were so desperate they ate grass. So I suppose that's the context. That's where we're at. I mean, we can be a little abstract and a bit binary about this kind of stuff, but nonetheless, I think in terms of food safety, I think if we take that as a kind of a part of the wider food security piece, but just look at food safety, it is hugely important to get it right. And I believe, and I think there is no such thing as safe food. It's either safe or it's not. Food is, if it's not safe, it's not food. And I think that's the position that we try to encourage standards and codex and support of SAFER and projects like this and initiatives like this. And I take all the comments about barriers to trade. But what I would say to the issue between Benin and Senegal, for example, there is the new African Continental Free Trade Association. That's where these issues should be teased out, not in fora like this. The European Union, for example, it started with a common market of free movement of trade. Ireland produces 9 times the amount of food that it needs. It exports it to 180 countries, most of it within the European Union. We can do that without barriers because our food security, our food authenticity, our food transparency is at a premium high level. And that's where we have come from, a scenario where 70 years ago we had rampant tuberculosis among a population because people drank unpasteurized milk. Pasteurization, homogenization of the milk, all the standards that were applied, got rid of tuberculosis. As you know, there are occasions, but by and large, tuberculosis is gone, and that's down to food safety and food safety regulation, regulatory frameworks, codex, all of these good stuff. So that's why it is really important and to acknowledge that there is a much wider food systems approach to this. But for the purposes of today and the purpose of SAFER, we should not lose sight that food safety is not a technical detail. It's not an optional extra. It is a fundamental part of food and food production. And who are we to say that people who are unfortunate enough to be in need of food systems, or food aid rather, should adhere to lower standards of the food that we ourselves would not be prepared to eat? So this is why SAFER is a significantly important initiative. That's why Ireland supports it. It's a fundamental pillar of One Health. It underpins all the voluntary guidelines from CFS, the 10th year of the right to adequate food and protracted crises, which is 10 years old this year. This is why we support it. This is why it's an imperative that other governments and other donors see the importance, that they link the importance of food safety into the food system and the wider thing, the wider food and humanitarian space. Because at the end of the day, we can distill all this down to 2 things: hunger and people. And we are, as I keep on saying, we are fortunate to be, in the main, donors in a position who are trying to help people, primarily in the global south. It is imperative on us to not lose focus that people are hungry, and we can apply, how we apply the standards. That's implementation. That's the trade-offs. That's where you do your discussions. But at the same time, is at the front end, just looking at food safety, we should strive to get the highest levels of food safety. The application of those then is at a national level. I might leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you to those online. Please feel free to engage with us further at safer@fao.org and have a wonderful rest of your day.